In this video, I'll be doing a brief description on how to solve every WCA event, and I will be doing it for 3 blind and 4 blind. I'm not going to do it for 5 blind though, because I don't know 5 blind. So pretty much any event besides for 5 blind, I'll be going over how to solve. So I'll be starting with the most common ones: 2x2, 3x3, 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and 7x7. I'm not going to do a full solve on all these. I'll just briefly describe how each one of these are solved. For 2x2, a decent way is to solve one side of the cube, solve the other side of the cube, and then solve the rest in one algorithm, which is pretty fast. There are faster ways, but for a beginner, it's easier to do that because there's just a few algorithms to memorize. For 3x3, we will solve the cross, and then we'll solve something called F2L, which will look like this. And once it is complete, the cube will look more solved like that. And then we perform an algorithm to solve OLL, or orientation in the last layer, and then PLL, or permutation in the last layer, which solves the cube. For 4x4, we'll start by solving one center, which would look like this. And then we'd move on to the next center. And then we'd move on to doing all the centers. And then what we do is we'd start solving edges. And generally what we'll do is we'll solve multiple of these edges at a time. So I just solved this edge and this edge, and that speeds it up a lot. And then what we'd do is we'd continue to solve all of the edges, and then we just solve it as if it was a 3x3 with the cross, F2L, and then sometimes we'll have something called OLL parity, which would not normally be possible in a 3x3, but we have a couple of algs which can fix that. And then we do PLL, but there is PLL parity as well. So we have algs for that too, and that's 4x4. Something very similar is done with 5x5, how we solve the first center, but it's just slightly more pieces than on the 4x4. Then just like 4x4, we would move on to solving all of the centers, and then we'd pair up the edges like this. And what we normally do is after we take an edge out to solve another one, instead of fixing all the centers, that would just take too much time, we just move straight on to the next edge, and this step is called free slice. Because if you break up the centers like this, they can just be repaired after. Once the free slice stage is done, and we have 8 edges already solved, and that would be in the top and bottom layers, then we would fix all the centers, and then we would do one of a few things. We just do something that will solve the last of the centers. There is parity for the edges, but it looks a little bit different than a 4x4. It looks like this, which can be done with a very similar algorithm, but that's the only kind of parity there is on 5x5. So that makes 5x5, in my opinion, much easier than 4x4, because there is fewer, even though there are more pieces, it's just only one parity, which is faster. And once again, we do cross F2L, OLL, and PLL for solving the rest, just like 3x3. And the same stuff pretty much applies to the other 2 cubes, which I'll briefly just do on both of them. So once again, we just solve all of the centers on both of the cubes. If you're wondering why this sounds so familiar, it's because same thing we do for these 2 cubes. The only difference is it takes longer. So after solving all of the centers, we will simply solve free slice, and just make sure that the edges in both the top and bottom layer are solved. Otherwise, you can't move on to the next step, which would be to solve the centers, and then just continue solving the rest of the edges from there on. Also, by the way, there are parodies on 6x6 and 7x7, which does suck. That's what parody would look like. 6x6, there's actually 3 different parodies on 7x7 for edges, but there's no PLL parody. So that's pretty nice. And as you might have predicted, we continue on with the cross, and then after we solve the cross, we solve this magical thing called F12. Maybe you've never heard of F12 until this precise second in time. Also, OLL parity and PLL parity are possible in 6x6, but this only happens on even numbered cubes. It would be possible on 8x8, 10x10, and so on. And we just use a algorithm very similar to the one for 4x4, and this is what a PLL parity would look like. Anyone who knows PLL would know that PLL is not possible. So then we do the parity, and then we have the G perm, which is a possible PLL. That never happened. Okay, moving on to the events that not a lot of people do, but still a good amount of people do, which would include other events. That's just, these are the more popular ones. So for 3 blind, what we do is we generally hold it in one position. Most people do it with white top and green front. And then for a half decent method, we use M2. So the M2 method, we'd look at this piece. This piece needs to go to here, which needs to go here, and so on. And then what we do is we do something, even though this doesn't look solved, it's actually in the correct spot. It just, we must remember it does an M2. And then we just continue doing that for pretty much all of the edges. Also, there is something called parity on 3 blind, but it's done a little bit differently. It's not done with the algorithm you think. It's not like 4x4 and 5x5, and it's slightly different. But anyway, after we do the edges, which looks something like this, we move on to the corners. Most people use this for the piece they want to solve, which goes here, and then here, and then here, and then so on. And then they do an algorithm that swap it, and then undo the setup moves, which is quite easy. And then if the buffer is ever solved, just swap it with an unsolved one. And what you do before that is you just memorize all that and then execute it with your blindfold on. Moving on to 3x3 one-handed. This is an event that I think is underrated and it's really fun, what you should do. So what I do is most people use their pinky for moving the cube, but I just find this awkward. So I use my ring finger. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I find it to be decently fast. And there's not a really the method is not different. The world record is held on the CFOP method, which is what I was discussing about earlier. Also, by the way, you are allowed to use the table in one-handed, because there's a lot of disadvantages. You're turning slower, but then you get to use the table for rotations and regrips. But but technically the best method is Roux, which requires no rotations at all. And it uses a lot of MOs, but that you can use the table for that, which I don't know how to do that, apparently. Maybe it's like that. I don't know. I don't know. So it's done pretty much the same, but it's better to use the Roux method. And you do slice moves like that. And I don't know about I don't understand them. Oh. That's how it works, kind of. Okay, moving on to Pyraminx. This one is a really easy one. I taught myself how to solve it. So anyway, what you do is you just get all these colors right. The other ones don't really matter right now. And you just make sure they're all on the same side. Next, you'd solve these edge pieces. And then what you can do is solve the first layer tips, which is generally what I do. And then you solve the rest in one algorithm. And then you solve the tip, which is really easy. Moving on to Megaminx. Megaminx, I think, it looks very overwhelming, but I have a tutorial on Megaminx, unlike most other events. I have a Pyraminx and 3x3 tutorial on my channel too. If you guys want me to re-upload it to this channel, I'll be happy to do that. So what you do is you just solve the cross. Well, it's not really a cross, it's more like a star, because that's what it would look like, ignoring the corners. And then you just move on to F2L, which, well, looks like this. This is what F2L looks like on a Megaminx. And then you would solve the next star, and then you would do S2L, or second two layers, which is probably the longest step on Megaminx, because it's not just for like this. Then you'd have to do the next color, which I generally do the one to the right, which isn't always the best, but it's pretty decent. And then you just keep on doing that until you get to the last layer. After you get to the last layer, you solve the star on top, which can be done in a single algorithm. And then what most people do is they either perform an algorithm, solve the top, or flip the cube upside down, and then do beginner's method on 3x3 to solve the top color. And then this varies for each solver, but what I do is I perform an algorithm that'll solve all the corners, all the edges, which actually sometimes I'll do two algs depending on if it's bad or not. And then we go back upside down and then do beginner's method, and that solves the Megaminx. Okay, for Cube, Square One, and Clock. Now I see that Square One and Clock and Cube are they're less known events, so I kind of put them in a different category. But for Skew, you solve a layer, and what I do, I actually have a tutorial on this method on my channel, is you do something that would solve the next layer, and then you just perform an algorithm to solve the top layer. Which can be really fast, but it can also be really slow. It just depends on how lucky the scramble is, really. If you want to check out that tutorial, it's on my channel. Just check out one of my earlier videos on my channel. Next is Square One, which I'm not very good at. I'm just recently trying to get better at it. So what you do for Square One is you generally start by pairing up a bunch of edges. And if you're wondering why, it's because after you pair up all the edges, that looks like that, you perform this algorithm that gets it in cube shape. After you get it into cube shape, you would then put all the corners on one side. After putting all the corners on one side, you would do an algorithm, which, do I remember this algorithm? Okay, I do. You would put all the corners on the same side, and then you see if there's parity or not, which looks like there's not. Also, and then you would continue by just solving the cube. Using algorithms to swap pieces and all that. And also, if you have a case like this, you could save it for the very end and perform this super intense algorithm which solves it. I know it's super hard to learn, it's very difficult to perform, and it can be very slow at times. Anyway, moving on to Clock, I feel like nobody knows that this exists, but it's a super fun event, and I'm not going to explain how it works, but I'll just explain the method that is used to solve it. So what we do is, maybe this seems a little less obvious, but we solve the cross on one side, flip it to the other side, and then guess what? Solve the cross on the other side, and then we do something that would solve all the corners. Then that solves all the clock. That solves the clock. It's a super easy event, and it's really fun. I have a tutorial on this for my channel as well, and it's something I feel like not a lot of people either know about or like, but it's definitely really fun. I saved this one for last because it's just the stupidest event, and why would you ever do this? If you don't know what it is, I'll give you a hint. Still don't know what it is? Why is this a thing? Why? Anyway, how you do this is you hold it in any position you want, and you will look at this piece right here, depending on the position. You figure out where this goes, which is stupidity because there's 4 possible positions, because red goes to this center. So then you would pretty much solve all the centers using the hardest algorithm in cubing history. This is the algorithm. Yep, that's right. It's so intense. It's like the most insane algorithm. I just barely know it. Anyway, it swaps this piece and this piece. You do set of moves to this is the buffer, this is the target. I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to solve all the edges using this. And if you don't believe that I'm going to do that, you can look at all the wings and all the corners. And if I somehow don't mess up on this step, they should be all the same. But besides the centers will not be the same. I mean, it might be a U2 away, but you could look at these and just figure that out. I'll remember that this is here, so this is gonna be torture. Okay, so chances are I messed up, but I wasn't paying attention. All I did is make sure this was in front. So I don't know. How terrible did I mess up? I don't think that was there. So I'm pretty sure I messed up pretty bad. But I tried my best to use the stupidness. Okay, anyway. Next what we do is we look at this piece, believe it or not, which guys remember we looked at this piece for 3 blind. Anyway, look at this piece, which we're using the same algorithm, which is the second most insane ever. It's that's the second most insane in cubing history. It's super hard and can be very slow at times. Anyway, you'd find out where this goes, which goes here, and then we just continue doing that, and forever, pretty much. I hope I don't mess up on this. Look at the corners and see how bad I did when I get back. This will be solved, hopefully. That will go to there, which will go to there, which will go to there, which will go to here, which will solve it. That will be solved, and that will be solved. So let's see how I do. Okay, I don't know how I did, but I think I messed up a couple times. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't. Also, by the way, I'm not doing this with my blindfold on. My blindfold has been on the ground this entire time, so I'm not doing this with my blindfold on. I'm doing this while looking at it. I'm pretty sure I've messed up several times. Anyway, then what we do is we do the same thing we've done for all the other, for 3 blind, is we just solve the corners, which, it may look a little, okay. I was gonna say it is possible to get parity, which would look like this, and then you just perform a parity algorithm. Anyway, that's how you solve 4 blind. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Only true cubers actually watched to the end, unless you're just curious about how to solve everything. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This took like an hour to make, and it's only a 20-minute long video. Well, 19-minute, 20-minute long video at this moment. This will be what felt like the longest video ever, even though it's not even that long. Anyway, that's it for today. I'll see you guys in the next one, if there is a next one, because I might go insane from this video.